Welcome back, everyone. Today I started playing the Champions Chess Tour, the Chessable Masters of 2023. Now, as you guys know, I played in the first event, which was the Air Things Masters. I was the runner-up against Magnus Carlsen. What this meant is that I automatically qualified to this next event. So same format, 8 players make it. There are players like myself, Magnus, Fabiano, Levon, Wesley, the list goes on, Artemiev, and so forth. So very big event. First round matchup, I'm playing against Vladimir Fedoseev, so let's dive right into the action. So here we go. Now, similar format as before, 4-game match. Now, since I'm the higher rated player, I start with the white pieces. If we're tied after 4 games, we play an Armageddon. So we're going to skip the first 2 games. First 2 games were fairly peaceful draws, not super exciting, and we're going to start with the 3rd game of the match with the score all squared at 1 apiece. So in this 3rd game, I have the white pieces here. I play e4. Vladimir plays c6, knight f3, d5, and now I play this move d3, and we have a Hikaru Khan with this knight f3, d3 setup. Black can trade pawns and trade queens and go into an endgame, but white is a little bit better here, and generally it's not the kind of style that Vladimir has. He likes to be more aggressive, more to the point, and a slow, boring endgame is not what he wants. So he plays e6 here. I play knight d2, he goes c5, and now I play g3, knight c6, bishop g2, knight f6, castles, bishop e7. And now what we've reached is what we call the classic King's Indian attack. However, black is down a tempo because if we look at the start of the game, black played this move c6 and then he played c5 later. So normally the way that you get a King's Indian attack is say e6, d3, d5, let's say knight f3, c5, knight d2, knight c6, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, bishop e7, castles, castles. And now in this position, it's black's move after rook e1. But lo and behold, as we get into this position, you'll notice that this position, black castles, and now it's white's turn. So basically we're playing a King's Indian attack where I have 1 extra tempo. So here I play e5, we get knight d7, I play h4, typical style. Bobby Fischer, the former world chess champion, used to like playing this a lot with the white pieces. The idea here is that you want to go for a quick attack. Say you play knight f1, knight h2, let's just say h5, knight g4, and then bishop f4. You get these knights and the bishop here in this nice little clump, and if black ever plays something like h6, you want to go queen d2 and sacrifice on h6. And this whole attacking idea can be quite dangerous. Now, of course, in modern times with computers, we know that there are adequate ways for black to defend, but nonetheless, it still can be dangerous. So in this King's Indian attack with the extra tempo, I play this move h4. Now, I think h4 is a little bit inaccurate. I think I should have played knight f1 first, because as we'll see in the game, when I push this pawn to h4, I create a slight weakness on this g4 square if black can ever play f6. Nonetheless, I play h4. Vladimir plays a5. I go knight to f1. f6 is played here. We trade the pawns, and now I go pawn to c4. Now, after c4, or I don't know if it's after c4 or before Vladimir played this h6 move, but I got disturbed at this moment in time. Now, those of you guys who are watching either on my Kick channel, or if you're watching on the chess.com channel over on the purple platform, you would have noticed that I actually got it from my chair. I was visibly annoyed when I had to do this, and I'll tell you guys the little story about what happened here. So during this period of time, I started hearing my doorbell ringing. So my doorbell started ringing. I'm like, okay, I'll just ignore it, whatever. And then the person outside keeps ringing my doorbell. So finally I go to my blinds, I open them, I look outside, and I see that it is FedEx, and they have a package for me. Now, unfortunately, they could not just leave this package at my doorstep because it required a signature. Now, first of all, a big shout out to one of my sponsors, Misfits Gaming, for sending me, I think it's a merch or a computer or something. Big shout out to them for doing that. Unfortunately, next time they do it, it would be nice if it doesn't require a signature, because this really tilted me. So I get back to my chair like 30 seconds later, and sure enough, I play knight h2, which of course is promptly a blunder, as you can see from the orange check mark, or the orange question mark, I should say. So Fedoseev trades the pawns on c4, trades the queens, and now he plays this move e5 here. And it's a very tricky position because these knights are not super well placed. Black prevents knight g5. This knight on h2 can't even go to g4. So the knights are a little bit boxed in here. So I play bishop to e3, trying to finish the development, maybe reroute the pony to d2, maybe put the other pony on f3, and so forth. Fedoseev plays bishop f5. Now I go knight to d2, and he plays this move a4. Now, I did feel during this game and throughout the match that both Fedoseev and I were very much on our back foot. We were kind of hesitant. We weren't playing our best chess, and it definitely shows here, because after knight to b4 here with the idea of knight to c2, the problem I have is that I can't go rook c1 because then black has knight to d3, or even just knight takes a2. But to illustrate the point, say after knight d3, rook c2, I lose to knight takes f2 because of the classic fossil. So Instead, Fedoseev plays a4. I go knight to b1 here, trying to bring my knight to the center. There is this nice little bastion square on d5 if I can get the knight all the way there. Fedoseev plays knight d4. I go knight to c3. He plays rook f8. Now this was a bad move because now I can play knight f3 and sack the rook. Because if Fedoseev plays bishop g4 trying to pin the knight, I will take the pawn, give up the rook for the bishop and the pawn, and with the d's ops, the bishop's in the center, the great knight placement here, white should be a little bit better. So Fedoseev plays knight g4 instead. Now I go knight to d2, trying to put d's knights on the d5 and e4 squares. Fedoseev plays rook a6. I go knight d5. He moves the bishop to d8 with the idea of playing bishop a5 to target the knight on d2. I proceed to play knight e4, rook c8, and now I go bishop d2. This is sort of a step in the wrong direction. Probably what I should have played here is something like knight to c3 followed by bishop e4 immediately, because black never really wants to take the bishop here, because after pawn takes, the knight has to leave the center, and then I have a clean bastion here, but the knight has no squares to jump to from e6. So instead I play bishop d2. Fedoseev goes king h7. Now I play knight c3, another inexplicable move that's not best. I should have moved the bishop to c3, but I play knight c3. He goes rook b8. I play bishop e4, trying to exchange these bishops. He plays g6, and now I go king g2. Now at this point I'm feeling very, very good about myself, but the one problem, as I noticed throughout the day, is that when you look at the clock times, you'll notice that I'm down a minute on the clock. Now in this case, I can obviously say, well, I'm going to blame FedEx because I had to get it from my chair and it cost me a minute. It's FedEx's fault that I was down a minute. At any rate, the game continues with bishop to a5. Now I go f3 to kick the knight away from the g4 square, and here Fedoseev makes a big mistake. He plays this move bishop takes c3. Now in this position, what Fedoseev should have done is played knight f6 right away, and after takes knight takes a4, white is up a pawn here, but black still has a not bishop c3, sorry, black still has a jumbo horse on d4, and black has some counterplay. At any rate, Fedoseev instead takes on c3. Now here I take with the pawn, which is the best move. He takes the bishop, and here I start to lose my mind. I play this move pawn takes bishop based on a pure miscalculation. I did see that I could take the knight, and now the bishop and the knight are being forked, and after takes I simply recapture the bishop, knight to f6. I don't know which pawn I'm supposed to take here. I'm guessing I should probably take this pawn, and after knight takes d5 and bishop takes h6 due to the attack on the knight here, say knight c3, rook d3, knight a2, and bishop d2, I am winning the game here because the knight is simply trapped. So everything could be really peachy and great, but unfortunately when I used my time calculating b takes c3, I forgot that after bishop takes e4, f takes e4, black has this move knight to c2. During the game when I was doing the calculations, I thought he only can go to like knight c6, and after rook b1 I've got a great bastion. The knight's a little bit loose here potentially. I can claim the b file, I can claim the f file. It looks really, really good, but I miss knight c2 with the idea of going knight to a3 and gobbling the pawn on c4. So I play rook c1, knight a3. I go knight to e3, trying to trade off the knights, because now at least if the knights come off, I'm going to get a classic kebab with rook to d7 here, and this might even just be very good for white. After check, king g8, and bishop takes h6. At any rate, knight f6 is played by Fedoseev. I play bishop to e1 here, again trying to activate the rook. He plays rook f8. I go rook d2. He goes rook f7, so now he's threatening to capture because there's no infiltration with rook d7. So I play rook to e2. He goes rook to d6. And now I play this move g4. Now as you guys can tell from the time situation, obviously I'm struggling here quite a bit, but I was telling myself just keep making moves, just get him low on time, and good things can happen. Fedoseev plays rook d3. I play bishop g3. He takes the pawn. I take his pawn. He goes rook e7, and now I have to play the very regrettable move bishop to f4. Initially when I was calculating bishop g3, I thought I could play knight d5, rook takes e5, and rook takes e4. Now on first glance, after rook takes rook and knight f6 check, king g7, knight e4, white is still worse, but maybe there's some chances. But unfortunately, after rook takes e4, black can play rook d takes d5. If I capture the rook, he takes and he has the extra pony. If I capture the rook, he takes my rook, still has an extra pony, and I lose the game. So I play bishop f4, and now he plays this move knight f6, which is a big mistake. What he should have done is not seen the boogeyman and played knight takes c3, because after knight takes c3 and rook to f2, black can simply play rook f7, and these knights are going to be jumping and getting into the game very, very quickly. So black has no issues here, and black should be winning. Instead, Fedoseev plays knight to f6. I play rook e to e1, and he plays this howler move, king to g7. Now at this point, for whatever reason, with 37 seconds on the clock, I knew this was a blunder. I could feel it intuitively, even without being able to calculate the entire line. I could feel that it was wrong, but then I thought, I just go bishop takes h6 and g5 and I win the game. I saw takes, g5, takes, knight d5, and I'm just winning due to the fork. because after rook takes, pawn takes, the rooks guard each other, knights on the rim, easy peasy lemon squeezy, and I win the game. But during that split second, I did not start to think about other possible moves, and I simply missed the very obviously winning move, knight to f5 check, forking the king and the rook. He takes the knight, I take the rook, I get the kebab. If king g6, I have h5, which wins the pony here, and it's a disaster. And if he goes king to f8, for example, I can simply take the pawn, and after knight takes g4 to guard h6, even this move rook to c7, winning these pawns on c5 and f5 should be enough, and I would win the game. But alas, no. Instead, I play this horrible move, bishop takes h6. Now, this is just a complete blunder, because after takes, as I realized when Fedoseev was thinking here, if I play g5 check, black does not have to go king g7, or even king h5. King h5, for example, actually loses, because after takes, I have f7. I cover the critical f3 square. He can't go to the back rank, so I'm going to hit the upgrade machine and get a queen on the next turn. But after g5, black can simply go king h7, and when I take the knight, he takes on e3, and if I try to push p with f7, black simply goes king g7, stopping the pawn. So it's a complete catastrophe, as I realized when Fedoseev was thinking. So I tried desperately to find some counterplay with knight f5 check, takes, and g5, just hoping that I have two connected pawns that I can push up the board. Fedoseev plays king h5, I take the rook, and now he plays knight e4, and with these knights, the game is effectively over. I try to continue on, but it's to no avail. I play rook h7, king g4, g6, trying to push his pawn, get something, but Fedoseev checks. I go king g1, he goes king g3, and now I have to play his very sad move, rook f1. I'd love to go g7 here, but it actually leads to a forced checkmate after rook g2, king h1, knight f2 is mate. If I go to f1, there's knight to d2 check, king e1, knight to f3. If I go to f1, there's rook f2, which is checkmate. And if I go to d1, it's one of the Arabian checkmates with rook to d2, because the king can't go anywhere either. So it's already over. So I play rook f1, he goes knight takes c4, I go g7, check, king h1, knight to f2. I take the knight, and now he correctly captures with the king so that the rook can stop me from queening or just capture the pawn on the next turn. So I go rook h5, he takes, I take, king e3, I take on c5, knight d2. I have to go rook g5, because if I go king h2, there's knight f3 check. King h1, rook g1 is a classic Arabian checkmate, as we just mentioned. And if I go to h3, black just hides the king on f2, followed by rook g3 checkmate on the next move. So I play rook g5, he swaps, goes knight e4, g6, plays knight g3, and knight f5 to stop the pawn from getting to g7. And now it's simply over after king f1 and king d3, because if I go king f2, he takes, and I can't even get my king up the board, because the king can't go to g3 or e3, they're covered by the knight here. G7, of course, covered as well. And if I go king f3, there's knight to h4, forking the king and the pawn, and once black captures his passed pawn, it's simply game over. So after king to d3, I have to resign this game, which means that Fedoseev takes a 2-1 lead. As we go into the fourth game of the match, I have the black pieces, and it's a game that I must win. Now, unfortunately, I didn't put this on move 1. I apologize, you guys. I'm trying to do the recap right away, but it is what it is. So game 4, black pieces. I'm in a very bad mood, because obviously there's a 10-minute break in between each game, and after the third game ended, I saw knight f5, and I'm just like, okay, what's wrong with me today? I'm playing like a total 2200. What's even the point? So going into this fourth game, I was pretty sure Fedoseev would play something a little bit calmer, like something like d4 or knight to f3, but instead he surprises me by playing e4. Now in this fourth game, I decided to play c5. In the second game, I played e5 on move 1, but in a must-win situation, you got to play like a Siciliano. So I play c5, knight f3, knight c6, he plays bishop b5, I go e5, castles, bishop d6, c3, a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop b3, c4, bishop c2, knight f6, d4, takes, bishop e7. Now, those of you guys who are watching the recently completed American Cup would have noticed that I had this position multiple times against the runner-up, Wesley So. So I play bishop e7, we get bishop to g5, and here I decide to play knight h5. In my games against Wesley So in the American Cup, I played this move d6, rook to d1, and knight to h5, takes, and king takes e7, trying to essay the classic bomb cloud variation of the Kalashnikov Sicilian. At any rate, in a game like this, especially with my opponent having studied this line for sure, I couldn't take that liberty, because the bomb cloud, it's always great to meme when your opponent's unprepared. If they're prepared, they're just going to slice and dice, and it's going to be a very unhappy ending. So I play knight h5 here. Fedoseev trades the bishops, and now he plays this move rook to d1, trying to stop me from pushing d6. Here I go knight to f4. and now he plays this move queen to e3. Now I think this was a big mistake, not in terms of evaluation objectively, but after queen to e3 I get a very straightforward plan of what I'm trying to play for. I think that Fedoseev probably should have played queen to d6 here, and after takes, king takes, and rook d1, white will develop the knight, maybe push a4 at some point. And I feel like even though black is completely fine in this endgame, white has no real issues, and there isn't a big imbalance because the only central pawn break is d5. f5 is going to be very hard to force, and if you get knight d2, knight f1, knight e3 with this pawn structure on d6 and e5 specifically, even if I get everything I want in this position, d5 is going to be very hard to play without like opening up the position to where too many pieces come off the board, and I don't think I would have won this game. But Fedoseev instead plays queen to e3, and now I go d6. And as the famous former world chess champion Gary Chess, the author of this great game that we played today, said, a knight on f4 is worth at least one pawn. So I played d6, and here Fedoseev plays a strange move a4. I felt once again that here with this knife on f4, either white should try to kick the knight with g3 here, or white should try to bring the knight into the center with f1 and e3, or via f1 and g3 and f5. So I was a little surprised to see a4. I played b4 instantly. He goes queen d2. Now this is a big mistake. In this position, white is still perhaps a little bit better, but the problem is I think Fedoseev here, he got stuck between like, do I just play simple moves, play for the draw? Do I try to win? What do I do? And he tries to play a simple move, queen d2, to win the pawn on d6, but now I get a lot of counterplay because I simply sack the juicer on d6 by playing bishop g4. And the problem for white here is that now you can't even put the knight on d2. Before, let's just say the queen is on e1, you can always go knight to d2 to guard this knight and not have your pawn structure getting ruined in front of your king. But when Fedoseev plays queen to d2, bishop g4, the only way to avoid getting these double pawns and having a very bad structure on the king side is to play queen e3 back. And already after queen to e3, I can now take. So if you take with a knight here, for example, I can take, and look at these knights on f4 and d4. They're really, really strong. So if white has to take on c3 with the pawn, then the knight doesn't get to c3 where it can go to d5, and after I play a move like knight to a5, I'm clearly better. Nonetheless, this would have been preferable to the game because Fedoseev instead decides to take the pawn on d6. I play rook to c8, guarding the knight but trying to put pressure on the c file as well. Fedoseev plays this move a5, which is just a huge blunder. Already here I think he realized he was in trouble. Probably what he should have done, I think, is tried to play something like king f1 takes king e7 and g takes f3, and maybe even this isn't survivable, but something along these lines, because what he does in the game with a5 simply loses on the spot. I take the knight. He has to trade the queens. You cannot play pawn takes bishop here because after queen g5 check, if you go to h1, queen g2 is checkmate, and if you go to f1, I simply go queen g2, king e1, queen g1, king d2, queen takes f2, king c1, and there's probably a forced checkmate with where is the mate? I guess it's check, king here, yeah, king here, knight d4, creating the fossil. And if you go to c1, queen c2 is game over. If you go to d3, there's queen to e2, which is also simply checkmate. So Fedoseev has to trade the queens. I take, he takes a bishop, but now I hit him with this nasty move, knife to d4, because now white cannot capture with the rook due to the pawn. And if you take with the pawn after rook takes c2, it's very fortuitous, but this pawn on b4 stops the white knight from developing to either of these two squares, and the game is just over, completely over. You can play knight d2, but after e takes d4 followed by d3, I have a jumbo horse on f4, a perfect bastion here, pass pawn going down the board. I can create the double stack on the c file. It's just game over. So Fedoseev plays bishop to a4. I take the pawn on f3. He goes to h1. If he were to go to f1, I'll just take the pawn and tickle the king again, and then I can start pushing p on the king side. So Fedoseev plays king h1. I go rook h to d8. He trades the rooks because, again, if I give white a move, let's say g6, and white can play pawn takes pawn, or even knight to d2, they're very decent chances of surviving the game. So I have to be precise here. Now, if you look at these knights, they kind of keep this king stuck in the corner of the board. So really it comes down to, can white develop the rook and the knight? If white can develop them, their chances to save the game, even though the position is bad. If white cannot develop them, it's probably game over. So here I play rook h d8 to stop the knight from coming into the game. He trades the rooks. If he were to take the pawn on b4, I simply swap the towers on d1 and go rook to c1, and it's game over because if white moves the knight, you lose the rook. If you don't move the knight, it's simply going to be checkmate next move with these knights covering all the critical squares. So Fedoseev plays rook takes rook. I take with the king. Critical moves. If I take with the rook and white gets c takes b4, there's no entry on d1 or d2 here. Both the squares are covered, and white can try to play b5 and create a pass pawn on the queen side. So I take with the king because still the knight can't jump, although technically actually it could jump here. That's probably the best move, in fact. But after knight to d2 is played, I take rook to d1, pinning the knight. But when I trade the pawns and go here takes and takes, the knight on f4 stops the king from coming out, and this should still be technically winning. Instead, Fedoseev plays bishop d1. Now I go knight to g5, attacking the pawn on e4. And in this position, it's pretty much resignable, but Fedoseev plays this move, rook a4. Computer says king g1, but it's still -5. And there isn't really much hope. So Fedoseev plays rook a4, and now I go knight g to h3. And you'll look at these knights, they cover these squares. King still can't get out. I'm threatening to fork with knight takes f2 as well. And it's already just, it's dead. It's over, completely lost. Fedoseev plays knight d2. Now I go rook to c6, activating the tower and trying to lift my rook. And here Fedoseev plays knight f1. Now it would have been nice if he could have played this move rook takes b4, allowing a very picturesque finish, because I can play rook g6 here. And after white goes knight to f3, there is knight takes f2, which is of course checkmate, but the more beautiful checkmate here is rook to g1, knight takes rook, and then knight takes pawn. And look at this king. This is a version of a smothered checkmate, I guess you could say, but these knights cover all the squares. Instead, Fedoseev goes knight f1. So now if I go rook g6, he has knight g3. And I mean, there are many ways to win here, but I don't get a checkmate on the spot. So instead, I simply play this calm move, pawn takes pawn here, and Fedoseev resigns because the one last hope he had was, say I go rook g6, knight g3, knight f2, king g1, and take. White can still take the pawn. He has these 3 pawns on the queen side. Of course, it's still completely lost, but the game can go on for a few more moves. But I'm having none of it, so when I take the pawn, if white takes back, I simply capture the pawn, take the bishop. I have an extra knight, no passed pawns, nothing happening on the queen side, so it's just dead. So I take on c3. Fedoseev resigns. He uses about 8 to 9 minutes of his clock. I use all of 3 minutes. Very dominating, very powerful win in the 4th game. So this means that we go to the classic showdown with our Megadon. Now in our Megadon, the way it works is players bid on their time. So the player who bids lower will get the black pieces with the time they bid. The player who loses the bid will get 15 minutes in the white pieces, but they must win the game. So I was thinking about Fedoseev, and frankly, based on my play today being so poor, I told myself I was not going to bid super low. So my bid was actually higher than it would have been against, say, a player like Magnus Carlsen or Wesley So or others, in that I bid 9 minutes and 38 seconds. Fedoseev bid 12 minutes and 25 seconds. So we start the game with Fedoseev having a little over 6 minutes, or a little under a 6-minute time advantage, and he plays this move c4. Very explosive. This is the classic English opening. So I go knight f6, g3, I play e5 here, trying to take some space in the center, bishop g2, knight c6, knight c3, and now I play this old line bishop b4. Now many moons ago when I was playing the English with the white pieces, I remember having issues facing this bishop b4 move, so I thought, why not trot it out here? Fedoseev plays knight d5, I retreat the bishop, he goes d3, and now I play h6, stopping white from putting the bishop on g5 and pinning my knight. So now he goes knight f3, I play d6, opening up a diagonal, also connecting my 3 pawns here in the center. Plays knight c3, I castle, and now he plays this move a3, trying to expand on the queen side. I play knight d4 here, offering a trade of these knights, because in an Armageddon game, what you want to do with the black pieces is get pieces off the board quickly, get it to a simplified position before you're too low on time. So if you get too low on time, your opponent could run you over. So after knight d4, Fedoseev plays knight d2, I play a5, stopping b4, castle c6, rook b1. Now I play bishop g4, trying to pin this pawn and create some pressure in the center of the board. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, you guys, my apologies. Oh, sorry for the spoiler. So I play bishop g4, he goes h3, and now I play bishop h5. What I think I should have done in retrospect is maybe gone back to e6 or f5 with the idea of playing queen d7 to win the pawn on h3. Nonetheless, I go to h5 here. Fedoseev plays rook e1, and now I play this move d5, which is just a bad move. What I'm trying to do is build a big black center, but the problem with building the center is that my bishop is offsides on h5. If I could magically put my bishop on e6 in this position, d5 is great because I have a lot of control. My knight and my bishop guard this pawn along with the queen, and black is simply better. But instead I put the bishop on h5. So after rook to e1, d5 takes, and knight b3, I play his move bishop a7, he takes, and now he has queen b3, and all of a sudden it feels very scary. There's a double attack towards both of these pawns on b7 and d5. The knight, the bishop, and the queen are targeting, and already here I'm down about 5 minutes. I'm feeling very uncomfortable because there's no clear-cut way to simplify, and I simply blunder by playing this move a4. Now again, I played this move because I didn't want to spend too much time. If I use too much time, I'm going to lose on the clock, irregardless of what happens on the board, or irrespective of what happens on the board, for all the English grammar folk out there. So I play a4, knight takes pawn, I go e4 here, He plays knight c3, and here I'm simply down a pawn. I'm just missing my pawn on the edge of the board. I don't really have much. I kind of have a wooden shield, which is okay, but not great. And I mean, objectively, white should be winning. So I play rook e8 to guard this pawn. He takes and plays rook d1 here. Now I have to play queen b6, and after the queens come off, Fedoseev has 5-minute time advantage. He is an extra pawn here. No increment, I might add. What more do you want in life? Extra pawn, winning position, up 5 minutes on the clock. You got to win this, right? So he plays bishop f4. I go bishop g6, e3, bishop a5. I'll go through quite a few of the next moves. Knight b5, rook d8. He goes bishop e5, knight e8. Now somewhere around here I started to feel like Fedoseev lost track of what he really was aiming for, because he plays some of these passive moves like bishop f1. Now mind you, white is still much better, but when white starts getting passive, I know what I need to do here. Since I'm down a pawn, I need to get my king to the center, and somehow I need to get my other bishop back into the game via this f7 square, or via f5 e6 as well. So I play bishop f5. He goes bishop d4. I play bishop e6. b4 played here. Good move. I have to go to c7. And now Fedoseev plays this move rook c1. Not a bad move here, by the way, but if I had this position with white, I probably would just gobble the bishop and go bishop to b2 here, simply because white has an extra pawn alongside the bishop pair. And when white has the bishop pair, this bishop can never really be traded off, because I have the wrong color bishop, and the bishop can always dodge the knight. So I think from a long-term perspective, Fedoseev should have done this, even if objectively it's not the best move, simply because the game will go on forever and there's a good chance that I will lose. In fact, I would say with the two bishops here and the time situation, I'd say there's probably a 90 to 95% chance that I lose the game. Instead, Fedoseev plays rook c1. I go rook d7 to guard the bishop. We got g4, bishop d8, bishop g2, play h5, and now Fedoseev makes a very peculiar choice. He decides to play this move bishop takes e4 after a long think. Now this is where I really think things started to go off the rails, because in this position there's no good reason to not capture on h5, because when I play f5 here to guard the pawn, white can simply go bishop f1 followed by bishop c4, and even though it's a doubled pawn on the edge of the board, white is up 2 pawns here. I can't win this pawn. I can't win the a pawn. It's just 2 clean pawns, and again, I think if Fedoseev does this, he just coasts to victory without any issues whatsoever. Fortunately, he's feeling some nerves and he decides to take the pawn on e4. We trade. I take the juicer, f3, bishop e6, and now what you'll notice is that even though white has an extra pawn on the edge of the board, if I can get the king over here and white can't really push this pawn, everything is somewhat stabilized here, and I'm going to be able to whip out a lot of very quick moves. So Fedoseev plays bishop e5. I go bishop b6, targeting the juicer on e3. He goes king f2. I play rook d8, takes. I take with the bishop, knight d4, and now I go rook a8, trying to win this pawn on a3 again. We get rook c3, rook to a7, and now Fedoseev plays this move bishop d5. Now already here it feels weird, because even though white is still up a pawn and completely winning, it's kind of getting to the point where we don't have that many pawns left on the board. If I can trade off like maybe 1 or 2 more pawns, there already are going to be very, very good drawing chances. So Fedoseev plays bishop d5. I go king f8, king e2, king e7. He goes here, goes back. I play rook a7, king d3, and now I make a huge blunder here. In fact, I had forgotten that I had made this blunder, but I played this move knight to d6. What I should have done here is probably played a move like f6 followed by knight to d6, and white is still much better, but I think I have great chances to save the game. Instead, I play knight d6 right away, which simply hangs the juicer on f7, and now I'm down 2 pawns. I'm down 2 minutes on the clock. I mean, what can I do? I do have 2 bishops, but it's 2 pawns that I'm down, so surely I'm going to lose the game. So I play rook a8. He goes f4. I go bishop to h3. The idea now is that I want to go bishop f1 maybe, and here Fedoseev makes a slight inaccuracy by playing this move knight to b5, because now after king to e7 it starts to get a little bit tricky. There are some issues here. If you play like bishop b3, a very logical move, I have bishop to f1, checking the king and winning this knight on this b5 square. After you move the king, I will win the game. So it's already getting a little bit tricky here. So he goes bishop c4. I play bishop f5 check, king e2, and now I go rook h8, trying to activate the rook on the h file. Now, even though white is up 2 pawns here, you'll notice that none of these pawns are really marching up the board quickly. These pawns in the center can easily be blockaded. They're under some pressure. This a4, a5 pawn push is going to take some time as well. So it's already a little bit iffy. So Fedoseev plays bishop d5. I check. He goes king f3. I check. He goes king f2. And here I play this move rook h2. Now, after the game, I really felt that I should have played this move bishop to d7, targeting the pony on b5. So if white goes knight d4, I simply trade and win a rook on c3 and win the game. Now again, after a4, white is still significantly better, but there are tricks with say takes, and rook h5, and there are practical chances for me to save it. Instead I check, he goes here, I go rook h3, king d2, and now the problem is that if I play bishop d7, white can play knight d4 because when I trade, the king will simply guard the rook on c3. So I play rook h2, we get king c1, and now I go rook h3, he plays e4, and I make the check. I'd love to trade here, but the problem is if I trade and go bishop c8, after king to d2, white remains up 2 pawns. He's just going to start pushing p with a4, a5, e5, king e5, king d3, king e4, and my white square bishop is super passive because it has to guard this pawn on b7. So I play rook h1, king c2, check, king b3, and now I go bishop g4, trying to checkmate the king with bishop d1. Plays a4, I go bishop d7, and now he takes the pawn on b7. Already here I'm down 3 pawns. I'm still down 2 minutes on the clock. It's looking very dire. The one bright side I have here is I can trade the bishop for the knight. Now I do think in this position after rook e2, if Fedoseev had played this move bishop c6, I would say with like 99.99% certainty he wins this game, because when I check he blocks and now he just pushes the a pawn up the board and it's just all over. It just loses instantly. However, the gods were smiling on me today, and he plays this move bishop d5, which allows me to trade and go rook to e3. Now this still should be winning for white, but the thing is, even though white has 3 extra pawns here, one of them is doubled, so objectively it's only 2 pawns. Secondly, it's the opposite color bishop endgame, and there are a lot of opposite color bishop endgames which are known to be drawn. So Fedoseev plays e5 here, I go g6, because if I were to trade and go bishop e3, he can go f5, bishop f4, king d4, and white is simply winning. He can just start pushing the b pawn up the board. So I play g6 here because I can always trade the rooks, but now if I get the bishop to e3, I'll win this pawn on f4. Fedoseev goes king c4, we trade, I go bishop to e3, and now you can't push the pawn because I will capture it. Fedoseev plays king d3, I take, he goes king e4, and now I play this move bishop d2. Now this endgame is winning for white for one of a couple of reasons. Now I don't know if there's a way to set it up. I guess I can't easily set it up, but just to illustrate the point, let me try to illustrate some version of it. Generally speaking, the rule of chess goes something like this. If the pawns are split by 1 row, generally in opposite color bishop endings, they're going to be good chances for draws. But in this specific one, you'll notice that the wide peepos are split by 2 rows. There are 2 files in between the pawns. Because you have these 2 files that are separating the pawns here, it should be technically winning. So I go bishop d2, b6, I go king d8 here, trying to get my king over. He plays b7, king c7, b5 is played here, and now I go bishop b4. Now the reason this is still a little bit tricky for white to play is because at the end of the day, you can't get the king in easily. If you go king to f4, I can play bishop e7. You have no entries here, and if you try to win this pawn on g6, I can push the pawn, capture on b7, and now it's a drawn endgame. So this is still a little bit tricky. So it's like you have to finesse it where you can't get the king in this way. You also can't move the bishop because you lose the pawn. So you have to bring the king in via this d5 e6 route. So here Fedoseev plays bishop c6, and now I play bishop c3. Now one of the inspirations, as I was low on time during this game and around this critical moment, is there was a famous game that was played in the World Blitz Chess Championship in 2019 between Magnus Carlsen and Gucci Reza Firouzja, also known as Ali Reza. And in that game, Ali Reza had an opposite color bishop's endgame, but he had double pawns as well as a pass pawn. I think it was maybe the G file and the E file, but it was kind of similar to where it looked completely winning, but Magnus was able to use his bishop and keep the king from getting in or advancing and pushing one of the pawns up the board. Now we all know how that game ended with a crazy flag at the end, but we don't need to go into that drama right now. So after bishop c3, Fedoseev plays king d5. I wait with the bishop here because the point is if white pushes e6, now I can go bishop a3, king e5, and bishop to e7. And once again, white has no entry. You can't go to f5 or f6. f4, you still can't get to g5. So this pawn and this bishop basically prevent the white king from getting in, and white has all these pawns and this bishop preventing the king from running to the other side of the board as well. So it's still very, very tricky here. But in this position, Fedoseev makes a huge mistake. He plays this move pawn to b6. Now what I think Fedoseev should have done here is probably he should have played, I think, king e6, bishop to c3 here, waiting. Again, the king can't move forward. If you go to f6, I just keep waiting because the king can't move and push because then you lose the pawn. But I think here there's a forced win with bishop to e4. I have to go, I think, g5, and now white can go king to f5 here, and because the pawn had to move, white can start pushing p and win the game. So the sample line would be something like g4, e6, bishop b4, king g6, g3, king f7. And as you'll notice, the bishop stops the pawn. It also guards the pawn. It is, of course, also a wooden shield, but white will just push the pawn. I can't ever move the king to stop this because then white gets a queen. So this would be winning. Instead, Fedoseev blunders the game away here by playing this move b6. Now, it's a very thematic move. It makes some sense, but the problem is that now after king b8, this position is a technical draw. White cannot win this game no matter what he does. And the reason is very simple. Now, even though the white king is going to get in here, even though the white king will be getting in, as you'll notice, like king d7. The problem here is that if white ever pushes the pawn, I simply sack the juicer, and this is stalemate because the king can't move anywhere. The king is simply glued to the b8 square. So this is a huge mistake by Fedoseev, and after this move, this is a technical draw. So we get e6 g4, bishop g2. Of course, if he pushes e7, once again I just sack, and after g3 white can't do anything. If you go here, that's stalemate. If you move the king, I simply push. You gotta take or I make a queen, and once again it's stalemate. So he plays bishop g2. I check. He goes here, bishop e7, king f5, g3, king g4, bishop d6, king h4, just delaying. Now I have to yield the pawn, because if I move the bishop, say e5, white can go actually I guess the simplest way is to go king h3 here, and if I move the bishop, white will push the pawn and make a queen. So after king to h4, I give up the pawn, but this is a draw because white cannot push this pawn, since I will always sacrifice, and I don't have to take any of these pawns. So we play a bunch of moves here. Show goes on. We dilly-dally here, dilly-dally, dilly-dally, dilly-dally all over the board. And now there's this critical moment here after bishop f1, and this is very important to note here, that if I capture the pawn to reduce the material deficit, I lose the game, because now after bishop g2, king to b8, white goes king c6, king to c8, b7 check, king b8, king to d7, and you'll notice that here when I move the bishop and white pushes, white has only 2 pawns on the board, but he's missing this pawn that stops my king. This pawn is missing from the board, so when I take and he takes, now the bishop guards the pawn, and this is simply winning because my king can move. However, I don't have to take the pawn, and when I don't take the pawn, there's nothing that white can do here. Again, we dilly-dally all over the board, but the problem is, at the end of the day, as long as I don't make a mistake and let him push or capture, it's a draw. So a lot more moves happen here. Again, I make sure never to capture the pawn, and it's also worth noting here as well, if let's just say white goes king d7, for example. White can never go king d7 here, because now I take and I win the pawn on b6. So even though white gets e7, I sack, and it's a king and bishop versus a king. And so if white can't bring the king without guarding the pawn, like if you move the king without guarding this pawn, both pawns fall, and then I sack the bishop for this one, and otherwise you have to guard the pawn, which leaves all the stalemate possibilities in play. So here he goes king a4, and now I just make a bunch of pre-moves. As you'll notice, at this point Fedoseev spent a lot of time looking for a way to find a win. He couldn't do it, and the important thing for me here is that I can actually just do pre-moves. I can yo-yo between a3 and e7. I can do like a3 and e7, the classic yo-yo. I can also go to bishop e7 and then yo-yo between e7 and f8 as well. So the game continues, but eventually, after many more moves here, I play bishop e7, and now Fedoseev captures the bishop. I don't have to go bishop e7. I could play bishop b4 as well, but the result is not in doubt. So after he captures on e7, white is ahead by 6 points of material. He's up 3 pawns and a bishop, but it is stalemate at the end of the day. So the game ends in a draw in this very dramatic, very entertaining Armageddon game. And with that, I win the match, and I move on to play in the semifinals of the winners bracket against Wesley So tomorrow. Now, going to be a very tough match. I played Wesley very recently, as everybody knows, in the American Cup. Nonetheless, it is what it is. We move on. Not a good day of chess for me overall, but I get the dub, and I'll try to be better tomorrow. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. I know this video is a little bit long, but it's a very exciting day, a lot of very dramatic games. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you have not already, and we'll be back tomorrow with a recap after I play against Wesley So in the Champions Chess Tour Chessable Masters event. See you guys soon. Bye.